Hello, and welcome to my channel. Today, I'm going to share with you the most mind-blowing and captivating story of the death of Osama bin Laden. Prologue: The Phantom of Abbottabad. Osama bin Laden, the mastermind of the September 11, 2001 attacks, had become the world's most wanted man. Despite massive intelligence efforts, he evaded capture for nearly a decade. His trail vanished into the rugged mountains of Pakistan, leaving the world guessing about his whereabouts. But in 2010, a whisper of a lead emerged, an elusive courier nicknamed Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti. For nearly a decade, Osama bin Laden had become a symbol of both fear and mystery. After masterminding the September 11, 2001 attacks, he vanished into the rugged terrain of Afghanistan and Pakistan, a shadowy figure who seemed impossible to find. His network, Al-Qaeda, was fractured but resilient, and his influence continued to spread fear worldwide, even as Western forces hunted him relentlessly. In the years following the 9/11 attacks, intelligence agencies across the globe followed countless false leads, searching for a man who had mastered the art of evasion. Bin Laden's whereabouts remained one of the most closely guarded secrets of the 21st century. He was believed to be hiding in the mountainous border regions between Afghanistan and Pakistan, shielded by the rugged landscape and the local networks that supported him. But by 2010, whispers of a breakthrough began to surface. The key came in the form of a courier, someone who had been in constant communication with bin Laden for years. A man named Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti, whose name emerged during interrogations of captured al-Qaeda operatives. Intelligence agents painstakingly tracked the movements of this mysterious courier, and soon, they uncovered something that would change everything. A compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan, just a few miles from a major military academy, where the man who had once evaded the entire world might finally be hiding. The compound, surrounded by high walls and security measures, seemed to hold many secrets. No phone lines, no internet connection, and an unusual lifestyle for those inside. For months, the CIA and other intelligence agencies kept their eyes fixed on the location, sending in surveillance drones and gathering intelligence through every possible means. The compound seemed too perfect to be true, but the evidence was undeniable. Osama bin Laden might be within reach. As 2011 dawned, the question was no longer if bin Laden would be found, but when and how. For the world, it would become a race against time, a high-stakes operation where failure meant not just a missed opportunity, but a symbol of victory for one of the most elusive terrorists in modern history. What followed would be a mission that defied the odds and ultimately led to one of the most significant moments of the 21st century: the death of Osama bin Laden. Chapter 1: The Shadow Network. The CIA had long suspected that bin Laden relied on couriers to communicate with his operatives. After years of tracking rumors, analysts intercepted a call from Abu Ahmed, who unknowingly revealed his location near Abbottabad, Pakistan. Surveillance of the courier's movements led to an imposing compound surrounded by high walls and barbed wire. Hidden in plain sight, the compound seemed out of place in the suburban neighborhood. Analysts noticed strange behaviors: no internet or phone connections, excessive security, and the burning of trash instead of its disposal. Could this be the lair of the elusive al-Qaeda leader? The hunt for Osama bin Laden had been relentless. For nearly a decade, the world's most powerful intelligence agencies had searched for the man behind the deadliest attack on American soil. But bin Laden, the elusive leader of al-Qaeda, had become a master of hiding in plain sight. Every trail seemed to dead end. The mountainous border between Afghanistan and Pakistan was a fortress for militants, a region nearly impossible to infiltrate. His location remained unknown, a ghost who haunted the intelligence community's every move. It wasn't until 2009 that a breakthrough finally emerged. The key to locating bin Laden came not from satellite surveillance or spy networks, but from an overlooked lead: a man named Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti, a trusted courier who had long been known to work with al-Qaeda's leadership. Information about him had trickled in over the years, but it wasn't until a series of detainees from al-Qaeda's ranks began to talk that the full picture began to take shape. Abu Ahmed, it turned out, was not just a low-ranking courier but a crucial lifeline between bin Laden and the outside world. The CIA had spent years piecing together bits of information about al-Kuwaiti. His name surfaced in interrogations, and as the intelligence network closed in on him, the operatives began to realize something critical. He was one of the few remaining connections to bin Laden's inner circle. His movements and communications were the key to breaking the secrecy surrounding bin Laden's whereabouts. In late 2009, the CIA caught its first lucky break. A team of operatives intercepted a phone call made by Abu Ahmed. The call didn't directly reveal bin Laden's location, but it was enough to tie him to a location near the city of Abbottabad in Pakistan, a place that seemed oddly ordinary, far from the lawless mountains where bin Laden was thought to be hiding. It seemed too strange to be true. Abbottabad, a peaceful town, located just 30 miles from Islamabad, was home to the Pakistan Military Academy, an elite institution training future officers for the army. How could bin Laden, the world's most wanted terrorist, be hiding so close to a military base? The compound, located on a quiet street in a residential area, stood out like a sore thumb. It was enormous, isolated, and surrounded by high walls. There were no phone lines or internet connections, odd for a place that seemed to be occupied by wealthy, powerful individuals. The occupants burned their trash instead of throwing it away, adding to the suspicion. No one entered or left the compound except for a handful of people, and there were reports of increased security measures, watchtowers, armed guards, and a general air of secrecy. The CIA immediately shifted its focus. Surveillance satellites began to monitor the compound, capturing images of the movement of people inside. For months, intelligence analysts pored over the data, watching patterns, analyzing behavior, and gathering any scraps of information they could find. Then came the critical observation. One of the men entering the compound appeared to be a tall, thin figure who resembled bin Laden. He entered the compound several times over the course of weeks, but no one could confirm his identity. There was still a nagging uncertainty. What if this wasn't bin Laden? What if it was just another dead end? Another false lead that had the potential to destroy years of painstaking work. The CIA needed hard evidence, but for now, they had something far more powerful: suspicion, intuition, and a feeling that they were on the verge of something monumental. At the same time, officials were also aware of the risk of failure. If they acted too soon and were wrong, it would blow the cover of their operation and destroy their credibility. If they acted too late, they could lose their one and only chance to end the hunt for bin Laden once and for all. As the months passed, it became clear that there was one thing left to do: act swiftly and decisively. But the decision was far from easy. In early 2011, CIA Director Leon Panetta and other intelligence officials finally presented the findings to President Barack Obama. The evidence, while not conclusive, was compelling enough to warrant action. Yet the question still lingered. Should the United States risk military intervention on foreign soil, or wait for more definitive proof? The choice was now in Obama's hands. The president had to decide whether to authorize a high-risk operation that would target bin Laden and, if he was indeed there, eliminate him for good. The shadow network of al-Qaeda and its leader were closer than ever to being exposed. Bin Laden's end was just beginning to take shape, and it would soon become the defining moment of the War on Terror. Chapter 2. The Decision. The stakes could not have been higher. Months of satellite surveillance and on-ground intelligence confirmed that a high-value target resided in the compound. In March 2011, CIA Director Leon Panetta presented the findings to President Barack Obama. The evidence was compelling but circumstantial. There was no photographic proof of bin Laden's presence. The decision weighed heavily on Obama. A failed operation could damage international relations and endanger lives. Yet, the possibility of eliminating the world's most dangerous terrorist was a risk worth taking. By late April, the plan, codenamed Operation Neptune Spear, was ready. In early 2011, President Barack Obama sat in the White House Situation Room, surrounded by his closest advisors and military leaders. The evidence, while compelling, was still far from definitive. The CIA had tracked the movements of Osama bin Laden's trusted courier to a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan, but they had no hard proof that bin Laden himself was there. For months, U.S. intelligence had watched the compound, gathering information through satellite imagery, intercepted communications, and human intelligence. Yet, there were still doubts. The compound was enormous, but it was located in an unlikely place, just 30 miles from Islamabad, the capital of Pakistan. It was an area that was home to Pakistan's elite military academy, a hub for the country's defense officers. The proximity to the academy raised uncomfortable questions. Was the Pakistani government or military somehow complicit? Or was it simply a fluke that bin Laden had chosen this location? Or had he been forced to hide in plain sight? In the Situation Room, Obama was faced with the weight of history. The decision to act against bin Laden was not just about targeting a terrorist leader. It was about making a global statement and upholding the promise that the United States would not stop until justice was served for the 3,000 victims of 9/11. But it also came with immense risks. If bin Laden was not there, the United States would be exposed as having made a reckless decision. A failed mission could weaken Obama's credibility and damage relations with Pakistan, a nuclear-armed nation with a complex political landscape. Moreover, there were concerns about the political fallout. The U.S. was already deeply involved in wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and any military misstep could be disastrous. A botched operation in Pakistan could potentially lead to a wider regional conflict. But the potential reward was equally significant. The death of bin Laden would be a devastating blow to al-Qaeda, and it would send a clear message to the world that America would never relent in its pursuit of justice. It could be a defining moment in the war on terror, potentially crippling al-Qaeda's leadership and morale. At 9 a.m. on April 29, 2011, the National Security Council convened in the Situation Room for a final meeting to discuss the operation. Obama had already heard from key members of his cabinet and military leaders: CIA Director Leon Panetta, Vice President Joe Biden, Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, and others who had all weighed in. The SEALs were ready. The intelligence, though circumstantial, was strong enough to justify action, and time was running out. If they didn't act soon, bin Laden could slip away again. As the meeting progressed, Obama listened intently to the options laid out before him. There were two main courses of action. 1. A drone strike. This would involve launching an aerial missile strike, a more conventional and somewhat safer approach. The risk, however, was that bin Laden could escape or the strike could miss him, causing collateral damage and killing innocent civilians in the area. 2. A ground assault. This would involve a high-risk, high-reward operation led by U.S. Navy SEAL Team 6 to enter the compound directly, infiltrate it, and kill or capture bin Laden. The operation would require a team of highly trained Special Forces operatives and helicopters to conduct a precision raid, but it came with many risks: hostile action from the Pakistani military, a possible failure of the helicopters, and the prospect of bin Laden being surrounded by armed guards or hidden in a way that made capture or elimination difficult. Obama weighed both options carefully. A drone strike was less risky in terms of human lives, but it came with a higher likelihood of failure and international fallout if bin Laden wasn't definitively targeted. The ground assault was fraught with danger, but it offered a chance to secure concrete proof of bin Laden's death. And, if successful, it would bring closure to a mission that had lasted over a decade. The meeting was tense. Vice President Joe Biden spoke up in favor of caution, advocating for the drone strike. It's cleaner. It minimizes the risk, he argued. But others, including Leon Panetta, were adamant about taking the bold approach. "This is our chance," Panetta said, his voice firm. "If we don't do it now, we might not get another shot." Obama sat silently for several moments, contemplating the consequences of the decision. His fingers drummed on the table in quiet thought. The room was filled with tension as the weight of history pressed upon him. This wasn't just about a military operation. It was about justice, the legacy of the war on terror, and the safety of American lives. Finally, Obama made his decision. "We go in," he said, his voice steady but resolute. The decision was made. Operation Neptune Spear was set into motion. The U.S. Navy SEALs would carry out a ground assault on the compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. If Osama bin Laden was there, they would capture or kill him. In the days that followed, the operation was meticulously planned. SEAL Team 6, the elite unit tasked with the raid, began rehearsals for the mission. Intelligence was refined, and backup plans were established in case things went wrong. The window of opportunity was small. Bin Laden could move at any moment, and Pakistan's military could intervene, complicating the operation. Obama knew there would be no turning back. The decision to approve the raid carried enormous risks, but he also understood the historic importance of the mission. This was a moment that could define his presidency, and change the course of the global fight against terrorism. It was now only a matter of time before the operation would unfold, and whether or not the world's most wanted man would meet his end. Chapter 3. The SEALs Prepare. The responsibility fell to SEAL Team 6, an elite special operations unit known for its precision. The mission was meticulously rehearsed at a mock compound in the Nevada desert. Every potential obstacle was considered. What if the helicopters crashed? What if bin Laden wore a suicide vest? What if the Pakistani military intervened? The SEALs were briefed on the target, Geronimo, the codename for bin Laden. They were told to capture him alive if possible, but were authorized to kill if he resisted. The stakes were monumental. Failure was not an option. The moment the decision was made, the gears of one of the most high-stakes military operations in modern history began to turn. With President Obama's approval, Operation Neptune Spear was now a reality. It was a mission unlike any other, and only one team was capable of carrying it out with the precision required. SEAL Team 6, the elite unit of the United States Navy SEALs. Known officially as DevGRU, Development Group, SEAL Team 6 was the tip of the spear in counterterrorism operations. Their reputation was legendary, forged in the fires of secretive, high-risk missions around the world. This team had faced the most dangerous targets and impossible odds before, but this mission was different. This wasn't just any raid. It was the culmination of a decade-long manhunt for the man behind the worst terrorist attack in U.S. history. Failure was not an option. The briefing. The first step in preparing for the mission was a briefing. The SEALs were told only what they needed to know. No one outside of the core group of operatives knew the full details, not even their families. The mission was classified at the highest level, and it was to remain so until the operation's success or failure had been determined. SEAL Team 6 had already conducted hundreds of high-risk operations. But this was different. They were not just tasked with neutralizing a terrorist. They were tasked with taking down Osama bin Laden, the figurehead of Al-Qaeda, a man who had spent years in hiding. The pressure to succeed was immense. The plan was clear. The SEALs would infiltrate the compound in Abbottabad under the cover of darkness, capture or eliminate bin Laden, and gather as much intelligence as possible. If things went as planned, they would extract within 40 minutes, with bin Laden's body in tow for confirmation. Training for the impossible. The SEALs knew they couldn't afford to leave anything to chance. In the days leading up to the mission, the team's focus was on perfecting their tactics and ensuring that every man knew his role down to the smallest detail. The operation would be swift, precise, and covert. Any misstep could lead to disaster. The first priority was preparing for the physical and mental demands of the mission. The SEALs spent long hours in the Nevada desert, training on a replica of the Abbottabad compound that had been built to scale. They simulated every aspect of the raid, from the approach to the entry, to the clearing of rooms, to the extraction of bin Laden's body. Every SEAL was drilled on how to breach doors, secure hostages, and eliminate threats. They practiced responding to unforeseen obstacles, like enemy resistance or equipment failure. Nothing was left to chance. One of the most critical elements was the stealth insertion. The SEALs would need to fly into Pakistan undetected. They would do so using 2 modified Black Hawk helicopters, specially equipped to evade radar detection. The SEALs were trained in the use of night vision goggles, preparing them for the mission in the dead of night, when the world would still be asleep. Their mission would take place under a moonless sky, and they had to ensure that every step they took was calculated. Risk management. Even with the most careful planning, no operation was without risk. And for the SEALs, there were several factors that made this mission especially dangerous. The first was the Pakistani military. Abbottabad was a relatively short distance from Islamabad, where the Pakistani government had military installations. Though the Pakistani military was not expected to be involved directly, the proximity of their bases meant that the SEALs could be confronted at any moment. There was also the risk that the mission might be compromised at the last minute. Bin Laden's compound was surrounded by high walls and security measures, and the SEALs had to prepare for the possibility that bin Laden might be heavily guarded, possibly with women and children present. The team had to be ready for anything, from unexpected confrontations to an uncooperative bin Laden, to even worse, an intervention by Pakistani forces. But perhaps the most significant concern was the helicopter insertion. The Black Hawk helicopters, chosen for their ability to evade radar and fly under the radar's detection threshold, were relatively new in their stealth modifications. There was always the possibility that one of the helicopters could go down, and in such a high-stakes mission, a failure of equipment could be catastrophic. What if the helicopters crash? What if they were detected by Pakistan's radar before they reached the compound? What if there was a firefight and SEALs were injured or killed in the process? The consequences were clear. Failure was not an option. In preparation, the SEALs went over the escape plans as well, drilling for the eventuality that they might need to abort or change course mid-operation. The worst-case scenario, having to fight their way out, was not something they relished, but they were prepared for it. Teamwork and trust. Though the SEALs were highly trained individuals, the key to success in operations like this was teamwork. There could be no hesitation, no second-guessing. Every member of the team had a specific role, and all must function in complete synchronization to achieve their goal. On the eve of the operation, each SEAL took a moment to reflect on the importance of the mission. They knew what was at stake, but they were also aware of the cost of failure. For many of them, this operation was deeply personal. For nearly 10 years, bin Laden had been the face of a terror that had affected so many lives, especially in the aftermath of 9/11. The men of SEAL Team 6 were ready to close that chapter in history, no matter the cost. As the mission drew closer, there were no promises of success. There was only a single objective: to kill or capture Osama bin Laden. At midnight on May 1, 2011, the helicopters lifted off from their base in Abbottabad, Afghanistan. The SEALs had done all they could to prepare. Now, it was time to carry out the most dangerous mission of their lives. Chapter 4. Into the Night. On the night of May 1, 2011, under the cover of darkness, two stealth Black Hawk helicopters lifted off from Jalalabad, Afghanistan, carrying 23 Navy SEALs, a CIA analyst, an interpreter, and a military dog named Cairo. They crossed into Pakistani airspace undetected, flying low to avoid radar. As the helicopters approached the compound, disaster struck. One Black Hawk lost lift and crash-landed inside the walls. The SEALs adapted immediately, securing the perimeter and pressing forward. The night was still, the silence of the desert broken only by the distant hum of helicopters cutting through the cool, dark air. In the early hours of May 1, 2011, under a moonless sky, the members of SEAL Team 6 were preparing for what would become one of the most daring and historic operations in modern military history. They knew that what awaited them in Abbottabad, Pakistan, would change the course of the war on terror. The stakes couldn't have been higher, and the time for hesitation had passed. The team had rehearsed every detail of the mission for weeks. Now, it was time to put everything they had trained for into action. Their objective was clear: to infiltrate Osama bin Laden's compound, neutralize him, and extract vital intelligence, all without being detected. But nothing about this mission was certain. There were countless variables. The only thing the SEALs could rely on was their training, their discipline, and each other. The helicopter insertion. At 12:30 a.m. local time, the two modified Black Hawk helicopters lifted off from a U.S. base in Jalalabad, Afghanistan. The helicopters were equipped with cutting-edge stealth technology designed to evade radar and keep the operation secret until the very last moment. With the roar of the engines muffled by the night air, the choppers soared over the rugged terrain of northeastern Pakistan, making their way toward Abbottabad, some 120 miles away. Inside the helicopters, the SEALs sat in near silence. There was little talking, only focused, steely-eyed concentration. They wore night vision goggles, their faces bathed in the eerie green glow of the infrared lenses. In the stillness of the flight, they could hear the occasional murmurs of their team leaders, giving last-minute instructions, ensuring everyone was prepared. There was no room for error. Each SEAL knew that, in a matter of minutes, they would be in enemy territory, on the verge of one of the most important operations in history. The night was dark, and the helicopter's low altitude ensured they would avoid detection by Pakistani radar. The military had planned the flight path meticulously, navigating through mountainous terrain to stay off the grid. The journey was long, tense, and filled with the knowledge that, at any moment, something could go wrong. The SEALs' hearts raced in anticipation, but their nerves were steady. They were ready. The compound looms. As the helicopters neared their destination, the small town of Abbottabad began to take shape in the distance. The compound stood out against the darkened skyline. Its high walls, watchtowers, and isolated nature made it appear more like a fortress than a residence. The SEALs had spent months studying the compound's layout, using satellite imagery and intelligence gathered on the ground. They knew this was the place where Osama bin Laden had hidden for years, a place that had now become his prison. The SEALs would split into two teams once they reached the compound. One team would land on the main compound roof, while the other would secure the perimeter. The key to success was speed and precision. No one could afford to make a mistake. The element of surprise was their greatest weapon, but it would only last for a short while. They had only minutes to carry out the operation before the Pakistani military could respond. The helicopters hovered just above the compound, the dim lights of the town below casting a faint glow on the scene. The moment of truth had arrived. The ground assault. With swift precision, the SEALs descended onto the compound. The first team, led by a seasoned operator known only as Red, rappelled onto the roof. The second team, under the command of Black, touched down on the ground. Within seconds, the SEALs were on the move, their boots hitting the ground with urgency. The compound was eerily quiet. The only sounds were the hum of the helicopters above and the muffled steps of the SEALs as they moved swiftly through the compound's narrow corridors. Each SEAL was focused on his task, clearing rooms, securing the perimeter, and neutralizing any threat that might appear. As they entered the first floor of the compound, it became clear that the mission was not going to be as simple as they had hoped. They encountered no immediate resistance, but there were signs of life. Doors locked from the inside, lights flickering on and off, and shadows darting in and out of sight. Bin Laden's presence was imminent. They could feel it. They moved quickly, breaching rooms one by one, neutralizing armed guards as they found them. There was no time to waste. Every second counted. The SEALs knew that their window of opportunity was rapidly closing. They had to reach bin Laden before he had a chance to escape or hide. The encounter. Upstairs, in the master bedroom of the compound, Osama bin Laden's fate hung in the balance. He had been awake when the SEALs stormed the building, perhaps aware that his sanctuary was no longer safe. Bin Laden had taken up residence in a small, sparsely decorated room, far removed from the luxurious accommodations one might expect from a man of his infamy. His life, it seemed, had become a series of calculated risks, and this final hideaway was his last gamble. When the SEALs finally reached the second floor, the confrontation was inevitable. Bin Laden's compound had been thoroughly cleared, but it was the master bedroom that would become the scene of his final moments. There, in the dim light of the room, bin Laden was confronted by the team. Reports vary about the exact nature of the encounter, but it is widely agreed that bin Laden did not go down without a fight. According to the SEALs, when they entered his room, they saw bin Laden standing in the doorway, seemingly trying to reach for a weapon. In those crucial seconds, the SEALs opened fire, striking bin Laden multiple times. The man responsible for the deaths of thousands lay dead in the room where he had spent his final years hiding from the world. The aftermath. The operation, which had begun as a quiet assault under the cover of night, was now coming to a close. Bin Laden's body was secured, and the SEALs began to gather intelligence from the compound, seizing hard drives, documents, and other materials that would prove critical in the ongoing fight against Al-Qaeda. As the team exited the compound and made their way back to the helicopters, they knew that this was the end of a long and dangerous chapter in the war on terror. Osama bin Laden was dead, and the world would never be the same. As they lifted off from the compound and soared back toward safety, the SEALs were already planning their next steps. The mission had been a success, but the fight against terrorism was far from over. For now, however, they could take solace in the knowledge that justice had been served, and the man who had once held the world in fear was no longer a phantom in the night. Chapter 5. Breaching the Compound. The SEALs moved swiftly through the compound, clearing rooms with precision. Women and children were herded to safety while armed men who resisted were neutralized. The sound of gunfire echoed through the night, sending shockwaves through the quiet neighborhood. On the third floor, the team encountered a tall man wearing a tunic and pajama pants. The CIA analyst, monitoring the operation from a control room in the U.S., held her breath. Was this Geronimo? Chapter 5. Breaching the compound. The night was suffocatingly still, its silence broken only by the soft whir of helicopter rotors slicing through the air above Abbottabad. The Black Hawks hovered like ghosts before descending toward the high-walled compound. Inside, 23 members of SEAL Team 6 braced themselves, each heartbeat echoing in their ears. They were about to walk into one of the most heavily guarded secrets of modern times, and possibly into death itself. The first sign of trouble came almost immediately. One of the Black Hawks hit a thermal pocket created by the compound walls, throwing its aerodynamics into chaos. The helicopter lurched sideways, slamming into the ground with a teeth-rattling crash. Dust and debris filled the air. For a moment, it seemed like the mission might fail before it had even begun. But there was no hesitation. The SEALs poured out of the downed aircraft like shadows, their training overriding any fear. The backup Chinook helicopter station miles away was already en route, but the team knew it wouldn't arrive in time to salvage a failed mission. Failure wasn't an option. Breaking the gates. The compound gates were locked, but that didn't slow them down. A SEAL set a breaching charge, the explosion muffled by the thick walls but still loud enough to send a ripple of unease through the neighborhood. Inside the house, lights flickered on. The team stormed in, rifles raised, their laser sights cutting through the darkness. The first resistance came from the guest house. A man emerged, firing blindly into the night. He was quickly neutralized. The team pressed forward, climbing the stairs to the main building. Every corner, every doorway was a potential death trap. Women screamed. Children cried. The SEALs shouted commands in Pashto and Arabic, directing the non-combatants to safety. But their focus never wavered from the mission. The man who had haunted the world for over a decade was somewhere in this labyrinth. The second floor. The second floor was a battlefield. Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti, bin Laden's trusted courier, and his brother barricaded themselves behind doors, firing at the advancing team. The SEALs returned fire with surgical precision, taking them down within seconds. Blood pooled on the marble floor, mingling with shards of glass and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Clear, one SEAL barked. But the mission commander, observing the scene via a live feed, knew the hardest part was still ahead. The third floor. The third floor was cloaked in an eerie quiet. The SEALs moved cautiously, their boots barely making a sound against the steps. At the top of the staircase, a woman lunged at them, screaming and flailing. One SEAL caught her, pushing her aside gently but firmly. They couldn't afford distractions. Then, they saw him. A tall man in a white tunic and loose pants stood at the end of the hall, half hidden by the shadows. His beard was streaked with gray, his face gaunt but unmistakable. He didn't reach for a weapon, but there was something defiant in his stance, as if daring them to finish what they had come to do. "Osama!" a SEAL muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible. There was no hesitation. The lead SEAL fired twice, the shots ringing out like thunderclaps in the confined space. The first struck bin Laden in the chest, the second in the head. The towering figure crumpled to the floor, lifeless. Geronimo EKIA. Geronimo EKIA, came the call over the radio. Enemy killed in action. In the CIA control room thousands of miles away, the analyst who had spent years tracking bin Laden exhaled, her hands shaking. The aftermath. The SEALs moved quickly now. One man bent over bin Laden's body, taking photographs and DNA samples. Another rifled through the room, gathering hard drives, notebooks, and anything that might offer insight into Al-Qaeda's operations. Every second mattered. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up. Dogs barked. A distant voice shouted in alarm. Then came the final hurdle, escaping. As the team piled into the remaining helicopter, the crash site was rigged with explosives to ensure no sensitive equipment fell into the wrong hands. The charges detonated as the Black Hawk lifted off, reducing the downed helicopter to smoldering rubble. The flight back to Afghanistan was silent, save for the faint hum of the rotors. The SEALs sat with their gear, their faces unreadable. One of them glanced at the bag containing bin Laden's body, then looked away. The world would never know their names, but tonight, they had rewritten history. In Washington, President Obama received the call. "We got him," came the confirmation. There was no celebration, no cheer, only the weight of a mission completed. Chapter 6. Geronimo Kia. As the shots echoed through the compound, the room felt eerily silent. For a moment, the SEALs held their breath, scanning for movement, for signs of a trap. The adrenaline coursing through their veins was tempered by years of training, discipline, and the understanding that the mission was far from over. The body lay crumpled, lifeless, but caution prevailed. The team leader motioned toward bin Laden's prone figure, and two operators approached, their weapons trained on the still form. Each step felt like an eternity. Any wrong move, any miscalculation, could still cost lives. One of the SEALs bent down and carefully checked for weapons, wires, or an explosive vest. None. The figure was unmistakable. The long beard, the distinctive features, the frail yet defiant frame that had evaded justice for over a decade. Still, protocol demanded certainty. "Get the body bag," the team leader barked. Another SEAL swiftly complied. As they worked to secure the body, a medic moved in to take the DNA sample. A small needle pricked the lifeless figure's skin, extracting the genetic proof they needed. Meanwhile, other SEALs swept the room, grabbing laptops, hard drives, and handwritten notebooks. One operator paused, staring at a cracked computer screen displaying an open email draft. The address was unfamiliar, but the message contained instructions for an upcoming operation. "We've got something," he said, pulling the device free from the tangle of wires. As they worked, the muffled sound of footsteps reached their ears. A woman's voice, sharp, panicked, shattered the silence. Bin Laden's wives, still in the compound, had gathered their courage and were approaching, their cries echoing in the dimly lit corridor. "Go secure them," the team leader ordered. A trio of SEALs peeled off, meeting the women head-on. They were detained with firm yet measured force. "Move back! Move back!" one SEAL barked in Pashto. The women resisted, clawing and screaming, their voices a mix of grief and rage. In the corner of the main room, a young boy, no more than 10, peeked out from behind a curtain, his wide, terrified eyes locked onto the SEALs. One operator motioned for him to stay where he was, the universal gesture of a palm held out. The boy hesitated, then obeyed, his small figure trembling as tears streamed down his face. With bin Laden's body secured, the team leader whispered into his radio, "Jericho, this is Red Ryder. Target secure. We are moving to exfil." As the SEALs moved through the compound, tension hung heavy in the air. The rotor blades of the waiting helicopters were a distant hum, a reminder that the most dangerous part of the mission, getting out alive, was still ahead. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the courtyard. A single shot. One of the remaining guards had somehow armed himself and fired. The bullet struck a wall inches from a SEAL's head. Instantly, the team reacted, returning fire with precise, controlled bursts. The gunman fell, his weapon clattering to the ground. "Clear!" a SEAL shouted. They didn't waste another second. Bin Laden's body was hauled onto one of the helicopters, the intelligence material was secured, and the SEALs boarded. As the Chinooks lifted off into the night, the team stayed alert, scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. The ride back across the border was tense, every second dragging as they counted down the minutes until they reached safety. In the dim glow of the helicopter's interior lights, the team leader looked down at the body bag, the weight of the moment pressing heavy on his shoulders. "Geronimo Ekia," he repeated softly, the words both a confirmation and a burden. As they crossed into friendly airspace, the team exhaled collectively. The mission was over, but its implications were just beginning to unfold. In the darkness of the helicopter, one thought lingered in each operator's mind. Chapter 7. The Escape. The sound of distant engines cut through the night like a predator closing in on its prey. The SEALs moved quickly, their actions calculated and efficient despite the rising tension. The downed Black Hawk, its broken frame lying like a wounded bird in the compound courtyard, had to be destroyed. Two operators, explosives experts, worked in tandem, affixing C4 charges to the critical components of the helicopter. Each movement was precise, practiced, and quick. The faint hum of approaching Pakistani fighter jets grew louder. 30 seconds, the team leader barked. The explosives experts secured the last charge and sprinted toward the waiting helicopter. The team piled in, bin Laden's body strapped securely in the back, alongside the cache of intelligence material. As the rotors spun faster, kicking up a storm of dust and debris, one SEAL leaned out of the open door, detonator in hand. "Fire in the hole!" he shouted. The courtyard erupted in a blinding flash, followed by a deafening boom. The Black Hawk disintegrated into a ball of fire and twisted metal. Any hope of reverse engineering its classified technology was now obliterated. The Chinook rose into the sky, banking hard to avoid detection. Below, chaos erupted as locals spilled out of their homes, pointing at the fiery wreckage. The hum of the Pakistani jets had now become a roar. Inside the helicopter, the SEALs exchanged tense glances. Everyone knew they were not yet out of danger. "Keep low," the pilot muttered, gripping the controls with white-knuckled intensity. He pushed the aircraft to its limits, skimming the treetops and hugging the terrain. "Bogies, 10 o'clock," a voice crackled over the comms. The co-pilot adjusted the radar screen. 2 fighter jets were closing in fast, their intent unclear. The SEALs braced themselves, every muscle taut, knowing they were flying through contested airspace. A single missile could spell disaster. "Any word from Jericho?" the team leader demanded over the radio. "Negative," came the reply. Jericho, the call sign for the U.S. base monitoring the mission, was working behind the scenes to suppress any response from the Pakistani military. Diplomatic channels were being pushed to their limits. "Let's hope they're making those calls," one SEAL muttered grimly. As the Chinook raced toward the border, the jets closed in. The pilot executed a sudden dive, the helicopter plummeting toward the valley below. The SEALs gripped their seats as the ground rushed up to meet them. At the last second, the pilot leveled out, the maneuver buying them precious seconds. Inside the cockpit, alarms blared. The Pakistani jets had locked on. The co-pilot cursed under his breath. "Deploy countermeasures," the pilot ordered. A series of flares shot from the Chinook, lighting up the pre-dawn sky like fireworks. The jets veered away momentarily, thrown off by the decoys. "Almost there," the co-pilot said, his voice tight. The helicopter sped toward the Afghan border, the rugged mountains looming ahead. Behind them, the Pakistani jets circled, hesitant to pursue further. The SEALs had crossed into friendly airspace. A collective sigh of relief filled the cabin. The team leader leaned back, exhaustion finally catching up with him. They weren't safe yet, but the immediate danger had passed. The Chinook touched down at a forward operating base in Afghanistan just as the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon. U.S. personnel were waiting, their faces a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. As the SEALs disembarked, they were met with firm handshakes and hushed congratulations. Bin Laden's body was immediately taken to a secure area for further confirmation. A medical team prepared to conduct a rapid DNA test while senior officials waited for visual verification of the photographs taken during the mission. The SEALs stood in a loose circle, sweat streaking their dirt-covered faces, their expressions a mix of relief and somber pride. The mission had been a success, but its weight hung heavy on them. "You did it," one of the base commanders said, his voice low. The team leader nodded. "We did. Now let's make sure the world knows." In the hours that followed, the team debriefed in a sterile, windowless room. Every detail of the mission was recounted, every second scrutinized. Outside, the base buzzed with activity as the intelligence material was cataloged and Bin Laden's death confirmed beyond doubt. Back in Washington, the president and his advisors received the call. Geronimo Kia had been verified. For the SEALs, there was no celebration, no fanfare. Their mission was done, and their role in history would remain, for now, in the shadows. As the team prepared for the flight home, the team leader glanced at his men. They were exhausted but alive, bound together by the kind of camaraderie forged only in moments like these. "Let's go," he said simply. The Chinook's engines roared to life once more, carrying the SEALs away from the mission that would define their lives forever. Behind them, the compound smoldered, a faint scar on the landscape, a silent testament to the night the world's most wanted man was brought to justice. Time was running out. The Pakistani military, alerted by the noise, scrambled jets to investigate the disturbance. The SEALs hastily rigged the downed Black Hawk with explosives, ensuring it couldn't be reverse-engineered, and loaded bin Laden's body onto the second helicopter. As dawn broke, the helicopters returned to Afghanistan, where U.S. officials awaited the team's arrival. The SEALs were greeted with restrained celebration. The mission was over, but its success needed to remain secret until confirmation. Chapter 8. The Announcement. In the West Wing of the White House, the tension was palpable. The clock ticked steadily toward the appointed time, yet every second felt stretched, laden with the weight of history. President Barack Obama sat in the Oval Office, the draft of his speech resting on the resolute desk. His face was calm, but his mind was racing. He knew the gravity of the words he was about to deliver. In the Situation Room, a different kind of silence hung. Key members of the National Security Council and military advisors watched as final updates trickled in from Afghanistan. The confirmation of Osama bin Laden's death had been triple-checked. DNA analysis, photographic evidence, and the accounts of the SEALs left no doubt. "Everything is in place," a senior advisor said, breaking the quiet. Obama rose from his chair, straightened his suit, and took a steadying breath. "Let's do this," he said. As he walked to the East Room, staffers lined the halls, their faces a mix of pride and solemnity. They knew this was a moment the world would never forget. The weight of a decade-long pursuit, of lives lost, and of a nation's resolve hung heavy in the air. At exactly 11:35 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, cameras went live. The president stood before the American people, his voice steady, his words deliberate. "Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world, the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of al-Qaeda." Across the country, households fell silent as the announcement unfolded. For many, the memories of September 11, 2001, came rushing back. Images of falling towers, the smoky Pentagon, and a Pennsylvania field where Flight 93 had gone down. Now, almost 10 years later, the mastermind behind those attacks was dead. In Times Square, a crowd gathered beneath the glaring neon lights, erupting into cheers as the news spread. Flags were waved, tears shed, and strangers embraced. Near the White House, a spontaneous gathering of hundreds grew to thousands. Chants of "USA, USA" echoed into the night, a collective release of a decade's worth of grief, anger, and determination. But for others, the moment was more somber. Families who had lost loved ones on September 11th sat quietly, reflecting on the cost of the war on terror. Soldiers who had served multiple tours in Afghanistan and Iraq felt a mixture of pride and weariness, knowing that the death of one man wouldn't end the conflict. In a small, dimly lit apartment in Abbottabad, Pakistan, Amal Ahmed al-Sada, one of bin Laden's wives, sat with her children. The sound of the raid was still fresh in her mind. The gunshots, the explosions, the shouts in a language she didn't fully understand. Now, the world knew what had happened. In Kabul, Afghan President Hamid Karzai issued a cautious statement. While bin Laden's death was a blow to al-Qaeda, he reminded the world that the roots of terrorism were far-reaching and complex. "This is a moment of justice," he said, "but also a reminder of the work that lies ahead." In Islamabad, Pakistani officials scrambled to manage the fallout. The raid had been conducted without their knowledge, and questions about how bin Laden had lived undetected in a military town for years were already swirling. As the president's speech concluded, the gravity of his final words hung in the air. "We must also reaffirm that the United States is not and never will be at war with Islam." Bin Laden was not a Muslim leader. He was a mass murderer of Muslims. Indeed, al-Qaeda has slaughtered scores of Muslims in many countries, including our own. His demise should be welcomed by all who believe in peace and human dignity. Inside the White House, there was no celebration, only a quiet acknowledgement of the moment. Obama returned to the Situation Room to thank the team that had made the mission possible. "Well done," he said simply, looking at each person in turn. The room was silent, but the weight of those two words carried immeasurable gratitude. Across the world, reactions poured in. From jubilant celebrations in New York City to protests in parts of the Middle East, the announcement sent shockwaves across continents. For some, it was a moment of closure. For others, it was a stark reminder of the complexity of global conflict. For the SEALs who had carried out the mission, the night was quieter. Back on U.S. soil, they avoided the spotlight, retreating to the anonymity of their roles. They had accomplished what many thought was impossible, but their mission was not for fame or recognition. It was for justice. As dawn broke over Washington, the city buzzed with renewed energy. The news dominated every headline, every screen. For a brief moment, a deeply divided nation found unity in the shared knowledge that justice, at last, had been served. In Washington, D.C., President Obama prepared to address the nation. At 11:35 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on May 1, 2011, he delivered the historic news. Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world, the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of al-Qaeda. The announcement sparked celebrations across the U.S. and somber reflection worldwide. Justice had been served, but the fight against terrorism was far from over.